Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I think all members in this House would understand that the Member of Parliament for San Fernando West and Attorney General was speaking to a bill which we've had for some time, in which it is clearly stated that the bill requires a 3/5 majority for passage. And in his submission, in his presentation here just now, he spent his entire time arguing, or a significant proportion of his time in his presentation, arguing why the bill does not require a 3/5 majority. And it would be reasonable to say, in proportionate terms, that he spent most of his time speaking on what would essentially be the arguments for the amendment he intends to introduce than the substance of this bill before his amendment. And I really feel that the Attorney General has surpassed many earlier performances today. We've had a situation in which, while the bill was being debated, I challenged him on the issue of whether or not he would seek to remove the 3/5 majority requirement of that bill. And he proceeded to do that at the end of the debate of the bill, right here before this House. He has, in the public domain, indicated that it was his perspective and intention, in many cases, to seek to have bills that do not require a 3/5 majority come to this House. Now, I want to say something about that 3/5 majority because it's important. You see, if you build a logical argument on a false premise or assumption, it doesn't matter how logical the conclusion from that logical argument is. You would really be addressing the false assumption. And the Attorney General here comes to us and he tells us that the issues that are being affected, and because of various precedents in law which he quoted, have to do with the right to property and the right to freedom of association. But the truth is that this bill, Madam Speaker, the right that is being affected here and the right which then requires the 3/5 majority is the right to work. Did I disturb you when you were speaking, Attorney General? Madam Speaker, it restricts the right of the individual to work. This bill, in many ways, you know, the Attorney General started by saying that he was dealing with an unregulated or unsupervised profession. That's to say, the planning, urban and regional planning profession. And that is true. But before the Attorney General came here, one of the issues I was going to raise about this bill is that perhaps what this bill does is make the profession too regulated and introduces too much supervision and therefore too much potential for denial and exclusion. Madam Speaker, if you are not admitted to the planning profession, you cannot work as a planner. You cannot be connected through the planning and facilitation bill that he mentions. And you cannot, because of this bill, practice your profession as a planner. And the second thing is that if you are never admitted, you can never practice your profession. And it seems to me that something like this, which the planners, I know they had discussion with the planners on this matter, the planning profession, the government came to them and told them that they wanted to remove the 3/5 majority provision here. And the planners told them, no, we do not want that, because we want the bill to have the support of both sides of the House, and we want the profession to be supported by a 3/5 majority parliamentary decision. That was the original intent of the bill always. That was the original intent of the planning and facilitation bill. And what I don't know if he negotiated with the planners or the Society of Planners in order to come here to do this, but I would think that they would not be pleased about the fact that what he is doing now is making this a very partisan bill. And I think that is contrary to everything that needs to be done in terms of national planning in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, this bill establishes the council, and it creates the council as a legal entity. Madam Speaker, that is what it was created. That is what this bill is for. And originally, it indicated that it was inconsistent with Section 4 and 5 of the Constitution. It still is, because it restricts the right to work by insisting on a gatekeeping role for the Council of Urban and Regional Planners. So it insists, in our view, we have to insist on this side, Madam Speaker, that the Attorney General cannot come just so and change the game, so to speak. I want to repeat the fact that it is a known fact that the government approached the planners to remove the need for a 3/5 majority, and that the planners understood the wisdom of not doing that and advised the government accordingly. And I would like the Attorney General to indicate, when he does his winding up, whether in fact he violated the wishes of the Society of Planners. Now, this bill was originally brought here and partially debated in one of the houses in 2013 and a debate, I think, in 2014. And there have been amendments to that bill, so there are changes to the bill that has come here. Clauses, in clause 3, pages 2 to 6, you deal with definitions. Some of the definitions have been changed from the original bill. And in terms of the qualifications, we have the same kinds of problems here that we had and we debated when they came to amend the Planning and Development Bill, Planning and Facilitation of Development Bill, which is that the issue of qualifications and accreditation and so on. I mean, they spend so much time on this thing. It has become so convoluted. I don't know how this is going to be put into practice. The definition now includes persons who have graduated from UWI in an undergraduate program, because the bill wants to mandate an undergraduate degree. And the amount of angles of insistence on accreditation that are mentioned in those pages 3 to 6, I mean, makes you wonder what is the thinking behind all this insistence on qualifications and accreditation. Now, there are things that are wrong with the bill in terms of simple writing out of ideas. So, for instance, in 6C, is on page 6, sorry, in part 1, what is the clause? The clause is 3. It says development management activities with respect to the implementation of relevant government policies. All right, I mean, I would think a more elegant wording would be development management activities in alignment with relevant government policies, because I don't think the planners are going to be implementing anything here. In terms of the structure of the council, in our original bill of 2014, there were 3 persons nominated by the minister, so that the majority did not come under the direct appointment and jurisdiction of the minister, and they have changed it to 4, so that the government minister, through the cabinet, would actually control. There are uncertainties here. For instance, 1 person representing the public interest. It does not say whether that person should in fact be a planner or simply a citizen of whatever profession representing the public interest. It is not clear on this. And the minister appoints the chairman and the vice chairman. Then you have the functions of the council, which are really functions and powers: to register urban and regional planning professionals, ensuring that these professionals maintain their status, annual updating of registration, code of ethics and standards. And what we have essentially, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what we have here, the Attorney General talks about a public body, but what you have here is a kind of quasi-state board, because there's ministerial control directly, whether it comes from cabinet or not, it doesn't say so, but there's ministerial control through ministerial appointments. And when you look at the system, you see that this is a quasi-state body. And I draw that to the attention, because you may say public purpose and public benefits, but it's a quasi-state body. Now, look at some of the problems with the bill again. On page 12, it says here in this particular phrase, that the planner must have a certificate of good character from the jurisdiction in which the applicant has resided for the last 6 months. Does that mean a police statement of good character? It doesn't make it clear. And then the second one, it says on page 12, evidence that the applicant has not committed professional misconduct that brings the professional planning body in the jurisdiction of which the applicant resides into dispute. Now, how do you prove that you have not committed professional misconduct? Do you have to get testimony from people? Do you have to get it from some other professional body? I mean, how do you go and prove to people, unless you get a police certificate or something like that, you are a good character or that you have not done anything wrong in the profession? And besides requiring all manner of accreditation, the Accreditation Council of Trinidad and Tobago is mentioned again as having jurisdiction and control over the acceptability of qualifications in the profession. Now, when we introduced the bill in 2014, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the People's Partnership then, the UNC, sought to develop this bill in close collaboration with the Trinidad and Tobago Society of Planners, which is the major professional stakeholder. So, in general, our disposition was to support this bill. But when you come here and having looked at the bill that they put here, and the Attorney General comes with a different set of assumptions, a different approach, a withdrawal of the 3/5 majority, I mean, I don't know how we could support what is really a hijack of the parliamentary process and a hijack of a bill that is meant to establish a professional entity in order to guard the proper jurisdictional and reasonable, sustainable development of the land space in this country.
That's their MO.
You know, I find this very difficult to, I cannot conceive how we could do that in the first place without warning.
He put it there in the first place.
Yeah. I don't understand how we can do that without warning. I mean, parliamentary conduct, I mean, requires one to behave in a certain way. You know? So,
Speaker, Standing Order 48.6. Mr. Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 48.6, please.
what is that?
Overruled. Proceed.
Thank you, sir. Let us discuss a little bit the context within which this was developed. In addition, there are a number of things here. When the Minister of Planning and Development brought the Planning and Facilitation of Development Bill for amendment, Mr. Deputy Speaker, it took her 3 years to bring those amendments. And there has been no proclamation of any additional part of that planning and facilitation bill except what we proclaimed in October 2014. Okay? So that there has been no further or additional proclamation of that bill since then, notwithstanding the amendments that they made. And we objected to many of the amendments. Many of them were simply had to do with these issues of qualifications and so on. So they took 3 years to bring that for amendment. It has not been proclaimed. The second thing is this one took 4 years to bring these amendments. And the real amendment that they wanted to make is not in the bill. It is to take out the 3/5 majority. That was the real amendment that they wanted. So the second issue I want to raise is that there's an issue here of ethical behavior. It is, the Attorney General mentioned it in the issue of indemnification, and I think he said there's a bond. So, and this is meant to regulate the system and the general public good, so to speak, from unscrupulous or unethical behavior by professionals. But the sanctions in the bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, only address the right to practice. What about compensation for those directly affected by unethical behavior? Because there's going to be a cost to them. If I have a development and you are a planner and you screw it up and you are indemnified, and even if the profession takes sanctions against you, what about my position in terms of loss? And there are many developers on that side. Now, during the meetings in my time, in our time of the UNC in office, and in my time as Minister of Planning, we held discussion with the built environment professions, including engineers, architects, valuers, surveyors, planners, on a collective approach to making that kind of insurance affordable. We had also initiated dialogue with the Joint Consultative Council from the construction industry on a structured approach to the matter. I think the Attorney General, since he's piloting the bill and the Minister of Planning and Development is not present, I think he owes us an explanation of whether there has been any progress on all of these matters, which was started as consultations in 2013 and 2014 and continued into 2015. Now, when this bill was first introduced in 2014, it was meant to register just 100 or a little more than 100 planning professionals. And because these are very important people influencing the profession, and this profession affects the use of people, the use of land, the use of buildings, the use by people of land and buildings. And it was introduced in parallel to the Planning and Facilitation of Development Bill of 2014, which is now an act. This was partially proclaimed, as I said, in October 2014. And what we have here is that all the positive bills that we introduced, the procurement bill, that was brought here for amendments, it is not yet proclaimed. The planning and facilitation bill, it was brought here for amendments. It has not been proclaimed further than it was originally proclaimed by the People's Partnership. And this bill here, given all the things and what are really blocks and hindrances with the Planning and Facilitation of Development Bill, even if we pass this bill here, what difference would it make in terms of the actualization of the intent of these very important bills that have to do with land development and the management of land in a sustainable way? Now, the Planning and Facilitation of Development Bill, Mr. Deputy Speaker, introduced what we call a registered professionals regime. And that is what the Attorney General was referring to in there, in which development was classified as either simple or complex. Applications for complex development under that act, which is what makes this necessary, this bill before us necessary, can only be submitted by registered professionals. So that you can get a draftsman or you can get somebody else to help you to do a simple development, which is a development of 20 buildings or less, or for a house or for an expansion to an existing building or so on. But for a complex development, which includes buildings on land beyond 5,000 square feet that consists of more than 2 stories, 3 stories and more, and land development including more than 20 buildings on the parcel, you need to have planners involved in that under the bill, so that you need to have this, so that the proclamation of the Planning and Facilitation Bill would need and require people such as these professionals in order to support the execution of that bill. All right? And there are other professionals that are involved, engineers, architects, surveyors, etc. And as the Attorney General correctly said, because they were not registered as a professional body, we need to make that right. So the intent of the bill we have no problem with, and we were prepared to support that. But and the Attorney General mentioned spatial development and so on. And all of these bills, all of these pieces of legislation, the whole business of development relate to a number, take into account and must take into account a number of very, very connected things. The Planning and Facilitation Bill, the National Spatial Strategy, which was laid before this Parliament in 2013, the Planners Bill, this particular bill that we have here, an act to establish the Council for Urban and Regional Planners and to provide for the regulation of the urban and regional planning profession. It requires, Mr. Deputy Speaker, local government reform, something which is now before a joint select committee and has not been completed. Because the Planning and Facilitation of Development Bill envisaged, and we started it during our time in 2013 and 2014 and continue in 2015, the transfer of all management of simple development applications under the jurisdiction of local government in Trinidad and Tobago. It also requires geospatial information systems. And for that, we had established a National Spatial Development Council, which has been eliminated. So, for instance, when they talk about an undergraduate degree for a planner, that undergraduate degree does not have to be an undergraduate degree in planning. There's no such thing in Trinidad and Tobago at the university or anywhere else. But you could have a degree in environment, you could have a degree in GIS, you could have a degree in geography, all right? You could have a degree in anthropology for that matter. And then you go, it's like the MBA. The people who do MBAs do not necessarily have a degree in management or economics. They go on to an MBA from whatever, they might have psychology below, all right?
Honorable Member, your initial speaking time has elapsed.
Yes.
You have an additional 15 minutes. You care to avail yourself?
Yes, thank you,
Proceed.
sir. All right. It also took into account regional development plans and the principle of devolution and decentralization to which our government under Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa as Prime Minister was committed. It took into account that we had LED or local economic development plans in local government. Not the bulbs. It took into account that we had policies to facilitate development and to stimulate construction, that we had social and community development strategies that were driven by a human development atlas, which basically dealt with the demographic realities of 14 regions and Tobago. We had a strategy which involved growth poles and economic development zone. We had plans for a road network and system and public infrastructure development projects. It is with all of these things in mind that this bill was rescued after a 10-year hiatus in the Parliament. That planning and facilitation bill, the Attorney General spoke about its evolution, but he did not highlight the fact that it lay languishing for 10 years and nobody would touch it, because they did not want really to change the development paradigm in the country at all. They suppressed the development of land in this country for years, and operating on a Town and Country Planning Act that dated back to the Eric Williams era. People don't realize that Eric Williams was the first Minister of Planning of Trinidad and Tobago under a national government. And so all of that, you know, you have to have a view of how these things happen and how they connect and interrelate. And to come here today, just out of the blue in the arbitrary fashion that is generally an aspect of governance under this particular regime, you come here and you just change the rule just like that and you say no more to 3/5 majority.
So did they consult the planners?
I don't know, maybe he'll get up and say that in his wind-up member for Superior Leader of the Opposition. And now, what we had done a number of things, you know, for instance, we had dealt with the backlog in Town and Country Planning. We had made it, you know, in 6 weeks you get this, in 2 months you get this, right, in 12 weeks you get this, etc. All of that is now shut. I hear in the Tunapuna Planning Office, you have a backlog from about the end of 2016. Mr. Deputy Speaker. That is what I met when I came in. I mean, there are literally thousands. And we were able to do it and rationalize it and so on. And these planners were meant to be part, when you pass the legislation, of the process that would quicken the process. Because when a planner does a plan that is complex, you take into account that this is a professional, so you don't have to take it through the level of scrutiny that you would, all right, if some amateur simply sent it in. And so we have waited now almost 4 years for these minor amendments to come here. And the real amendments are that they have complicated the educational requirements to be a planner and made it extremely convoluted. They have restricted in an exclusionary way the admission process for establishing members of the planning profession. And thirdly, given what they have done with the other elements of development to which this bill and the planners as professionals are critical, the value of this bill in terms of any kind of actual development work is almost negligible. You know, The last time they came here, they took simple development. We had simple development and complex development in one part of the bill. They separated out, and by the time you read the bill, you don't know which one relates to which. And it's the same thing here to achieve I don't know what purposes, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So I asked the question, what is the state of backlog, and whether this bill will be proclaimed together with the other bills in order to facilitate the process of development in this country. You know, if you...
But for Naparima, right, your comment is reaching my ear, so please, proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I indicated before, we had a hand in this bill. But we had a hand in this bill together with other bills that were really for the reform of the economy and of governance in this country. When you take procurement bill, when you procurement reform, when you take the planning and facilitation bill, when you take this bill, when you take the other things that I mentioned with GIS, etc., with devolution of power, decentralization, and so on, with spatial planning of a certain kind, we had a vision for this country in which all of this thing fit. And that vision was led by a lady, the first lady Prime Minister of this country, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar. But all of that has been undermined now by the lag in time, by the amendments that make no sense, by the subversion of the 3/5 majority process, which the planners wanted. And I do not see any enlightenment in the development of Trinidad and Tobago, really, and in the development framework for Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, you don't even see the construction happening in the country. There continues to be, under this regime, a suppression of land development, in my view. There are many things that we pass, for instance, multiple family dwellings on 5,000 square feet that are not being facilitated now. We made decisions that created the conditions for taller buildings to go up in different parts of the country. All of that has been suppressed by this particular government. And really, when you think about it, their approach to development is development control. Their approach to development is development control. They want to control the process of development in the country. They want to control who develops. They want to control who gets permission. They want to control who gets into the planning profession and therefore becomes aligned to the development process. And their approach to development, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is development control, pure and simple. It is suppression of the many for the benefit of the few. And the end of that is skewed development. It is inequality. It is a gap between the rich and the poor that grows, and it is development which guarantees, if we do not correct it, that during the process of development which proceeds in that way, you are going to have a massive rebellion against an oligarchic elite in Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.